Well, good afternoon. My name is Drew Bond, and I am the CEO of the C3Solutions, the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions. C3Solutions is an educational organization dedicated to promoting free market solutions to our greatest climate, energy, and environment challenges. This is a live video event series we call The Right Voices, which highlights how conservative leaders propose free market solutions to address our greatest climate, energy, and environment challenges. To learn more, please visit us at c3newsmag.com. Today, we are delighted to have with us Congressman John Curtis, who proudly represents Utah's 3rd Congressional District, the youngest in the country with an average age of 26 years old. My goodness. Congressman Curtis serves on the House Natural Resources and Foreign Affairs Committees. He prides himself in staying close to his constituents, and in 2018 held over 100 town halls and survived. He received a number of awards, including the Silicon Slopes Community Hero Award, the Civic Innovator of the Year by Utah Valley University, and the Outstanding Citizen Award by BYU. Prior to being elected to Congress, John served 2 terms as mayor of Provo City. He was named the #1 top elected official on social media, and in 2015 by the Government Social Media Group, and was recognized by Forbes for his commitment to citizen engagement. Congressman Curtis, then mayor, was reelected for a second 4-year term as mayor in 2013 with 86.49% of the vote. I would say that's a pretty large majority. As mayor, he averaged an approval rating of 93%. During his terms in office, the city of Provo ranked #1 in the nation for business and careers by Forbes, as well as #1 for well-being by Gallup. Before becoming mayor, John was a small business owner in Provo, working with his partners to build their business Action Target, where he led sales and operations strategy. Congressman Curtis and his wife, Sue, have 6 children and 7 grandchildren. And interestingly, he speaks Mandarin Chinese, which we won't ask you to exhibit today. Congressman Curtis, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
Very, very well. Thank you, Drew. Like much of the country, we're being blasted with snow. I wish I could show you right outside my window. It's coming down pretty fast and furious.
Yeah. Well, in that honor, I wore my sweater today and not a tie like you, but I guess you've got some official business to do. So thanks again for joining us.
You bet.
Congressman Curtis, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what motivated you to run for Congress.
You mentioned in the introduction about being mayor. I wish everybody could visit Provo. It's just an amazing city. It was just recognized again as the #1 metro area in the country. It's a fantastic quality of life, amazing people, and had the opportunity to be mayor and had, I would say, a degree of success. And as that time came to a conclusion, this opportunity opened up to run for Congress. And at the time, I was foolish enough to assume that it would be like the experience of being mayor. And there are some things that are the same, but there are a lot that are just very, very different. So I hopped in, and here I am. That was 3 years ago.
Well, congratulations on your election. Tell us a little bit about your constituents. What are the people like there in your district?
You mentioned the youngest district in the country. It's 26, and that brings a really fun dynamic to the district. It's very entrepreneurial, very high tech, and at the same time, I have a large rural part of the district. And in that rural part of the district, upwards of 90% of the property is owned by the federal government. And these are amazing places. Maybe people would have heard of Arches National Park or Bears Ears. Some people have said I have more antiquities in my district than any district in the entire country, and I believe that's probably true. And so I deal a lot with public lands issues and how to protect and preserve these beautiful places, and at the same time allow people to use the land as they have traditionally. And it sometimes, well, it frequently runs into a lot of conflict.
Yeah. Well, would you say that your constituents are largely conservative, or how would you describe them on the political spectrum?
So there's a term we use in Washington, it's R+26, which means that out of the gate, I have a 26% advantage over my Democratic opponents. So it's very, very conservative, but it's different than what most people would perceive as conservative. We've surprised people. We, as a state, we came out with what was called the Utah Compact about immigration. That was very forward-looking on immigration, and that surprised a lot of people. We've done the same on equal rights for all, and a number of issues that people have kind of been surprised. I would say we're very fiscally conservative, about as far right as you can be as a district on that. But it's not a stereotypical R+26.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like some really interesting constituents. And anyway, I'm glad to see there's still some fiscal conservatives alive and well in America today. So what about, this topic of climate change? I mean, this is obviously one of the key things we want to talk about at C3 Solutions, and how you can still be conservative and care about the climate and even talk about climate change being important. And I'm just curious to know, how you kind of approach that issue and how you think through that lens.
I like to joke that Utahns are the best environmentalists anywhere in the world, and they don't identify as environmentalists, but they're people who care deeply about their surroundings, about the earth, about stewardship over the earth. That's very inherent in our belief system here in Utah. And so it's unfortunate. One of my biggest regrets is conservatives are branded as not caring about the planet. And it's just not true at all. We've just done a terrible job of talking about it and positioning ourselves. And one of my passions and one of my missions is to let it be known that conservatives do care, and that we have great ideas, ideas that would help in a dramatic fashion to improve our environment and take care of the environment in a better way.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, though, that, as you know, has really been polarizing for sometimes for political reasons and sometimes for other reasons, is just this whole question around science and what should people believe, and candidly, I think early on the science was politicized, and in many cases folks were maybe more skeptical about the science, more skeptical about the politics around the science than the actual science itself. And when you dig into the science, sometimes it's hard to not see some of the evidence there. But I'm just curious to think, how do you sort of view that issue of science, and how do you approach it as a conservative and someone from your district?
I remember the first time at a town hall meeting that I said the climate was changing and man was influencing it. I ended up on the top fold of the newspaper, right? Like, this is a big deal. The Republican actually says that the climate's changing. And what I've learned is that it's a litmus test, and it's terrible that it's a litmus test. I wish that it wasn't, but Republicans are not getting a seat at the table because they're failing that litmus test. And this is where I say, look, we're in our hearts, we care deeply about this earth, but we hate that question. And I think, I've compared it, and I feel uncomfortable every time I do, but I think it's a really good analogy. I compare it to when we talk about the wall and immigration, how quickly that turns people off. And that whole question turns Republicans off as well. And it's as if you can't care about the earth if you haven't resolved that issue. And I think that's a mistake. I don't think we should keep people from the table just because they haven't resolved that issue. They may care deeply about the earth and want to take care of the earth, and they don't want pollutants in the air. They don't want carbon in the air. But for some reason, they're uncomfortable with the question. So I like to say to my friends on the right, get over it, answer the question. It's not that hard. And I'd like to say to my friends on the left, stop asking the question, right? It's keeping us from having a good dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I think people are sort of everywhere on the spectrum in terms of either their understanding of the science or just their opinions of the science, and kind of, the people that are feeding them that science, or, maybe they only hear about it through particular news lenses. So that's a real challenge.
It is. And I think part of the problem is we tend to look at it as an all or nothing. So if we say that man's influencing it, we feel like we have to say, then we have to stop everything that we're doing. Yeah. Right. And to me, it's a far more nuanced question. I'm not a scientist. I don't know how much man is influencing it. I don't know a lot, but I know I want to take care of this earth, right? And I know that decades and decades and decades of global industrial revolution has put so many pollutants into the air. It has to be impacting the climate, and that's not a hard reach for Republicans if you approach it that way. And if you can just get to that point, and then you can say, well, now you're invited to a seat at the table. If you can't get to that point, you don't really get a seat at the table and being a serious thought leader on this issue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, along those lines, thinking about your Republican colleagues, it seems as though, as you noted, I mean, the first time you mentioned a town hall, you're top of the fold, newsmaker. How have things changed from then to today, and how your colleagues think about this issue and talk about the issue?
Yeah, so on one hand, we've made tremendous progress. If you look at the new freshman class of Republicans coming into Congress, they're very comfortable talking about this. They don't have any problem with the question. On the other hand, there's still too many that are just very uncomfortable with the question. If you ask them the question, you'll hear something like, yeah, it's changing. It's so painful, right, for them. And so I see good news and bad news on the horizon on that question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it does seem, though, that, I don't know, it seems like in the last couple of years, at least most Republicans, or many more Republicans, are willing to talk about the issue. And maybe that's in part due to your leadership and people like you willing to talk about it.
Well, I don't know about that, but I can tell you it's a mission of mine to get Republicans comfortable on their feet on this. You mentioned in the introduction, I have the youngest district in the country. Maybe that's why this is a little easier for me. My constituents get it. I hear about it. Yeah. I'm amazed that my colleagues don't hear about it more than they do, but I hear about it, and it's very important in my district.
Yeah. What can conservatives do? I mean, C3Solutions, obviously, we're the conservative coalition for climate solutions, right? We want to be for something. We want to be advocating for solutions. And just, from your perspective, what more can conservatives be doing, and how do you think about the policy options that exist?
So I like to look at it from this perspective. What is the goal? The goal, if you really want to simplify it, is to put less pollutants, specifically greenhouse gas emissions, in the air. So if we evaluate policy from that perspective, it becomes much easier. And so I'll bring up the Keystone Pipeline, which has been very controversial, right? So let's ask the question does it reduce CO2 in the air to close down the pipeline? I would argue that in some cases, it actually increases CO2 in the air because we've not changed demand, right? That same oil is going to be used. It's going to come from dirtier sources. So I think it's important for conservatives and everybody on all sides of this to keep the end goal in mind. So conservatives like to talk, we're far better at like checking boxes and things like that. So we like to talk about like, well, what will it do? Not how does it make us feel, but what will it do? So talking about nuclear is how do we have this discussion without talking about nuclear, for example? Yep. If the goal is to reduce carbon in the air, we have something right in front of us that will dramatically change that equation. So that needs to be on the table. I like to challenge my friends on the left with fossil fuels and say, look, if you really want to reduce carbon in the air, are you willing to use fossil fuels to do that? And everybody agrees that the biggest reduction in the United States of carbon in the air is natural gas, right? A fossil fuel. Well, if we applied that same logic in China and in India and in Russia, we could do more to reduce carbon in the air than the entire Green New Deal combined. Right? And so I can challenge even my friends on the left a little bit in their thinking, right? That like, look, you've got to be willing to consider some things that you're not currently willing to consider if the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the air. If it's not, if it's social engineering, which a lot of Republicans suspect, right? That's one of the reasons they're turned off by it is, oh, you just want to do social engineering, right? And if that's really the goal, then you're going to turn off Republicans. But that's why I think it's important to just like focus on what is the end goal. The end goal is putting less pollutants in the air.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that because, like, in the beginning of that, you mentioned nuclear energy, for instance. And, it's clear. I mean, nuclear energy is one of the cleanest forms and in fact, safest forms of energy. And yet, the reputation isn't quite there yet. And in reality, if you talk to the folks on the left, many of them aren't willing to talk about nuclear energy. And in fact, it's, a big piece of the puzzle for helping to reduce carbon emissions. It just surprises me that that's the case.
Yeah. And I think what I would challenge them with that don't like nuclear is tell us what you don't like about nuclear. Let us solve that, right? Don't just say nuclear is off the table. Say, well, we're worried about spent rods or we're worried about safety, right? Okay, let's step up to the table and solve those worries. right? And I think we can do that instead of just saying, no, we got to take it off the table.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of taking things off the table, I mean, you mentioned the Keystone Pipeline, and this early days of the Biden administration. Just curious on your assessment of how productive it's been for the environment, and just what's your kind of view on that?
Well, let me just tell you, I wish that President Biden would slow down long enough to bring Republicans with him. I think they would go with him. And the problem with the executive orders is you don't even give Republicans a chance, right, to step up to the table and be part of the solution. And the executive orders are not lasting. President Biden's undoing a lot of President Trump's, and President Trump will have a successor who will undo some of his. And if we could do these things in Congress, we could make them permanent, or at least far more long-lasting than otherwise. We see that with the Paris Accord, right? President Obama is in, Trump is out, Biden is in, and that's not a really good way to deal with these problems. And if we could do it in Congress, then we're in, and we're in for good. And you have to reach bipartisan consensus. And so that would be my message to President Biden is, look, give us a chance. Let us see if we'll come sit at the table with you to resolve these things. And if we can, it's far more productive for the American people than just doing it with executive orders.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, are there areas, specific policies that you feel like are ripe for coming together, working across the aisle on?
Absolutely. And that's the great thing about Republicans getting involved is without us at the table, all we hear is the one side, right, of the solutions. And they tend to be the things you hear about would be the Green New Deal. And I know many people on the left would say, well, it's far deeper than that. And I would agree with them. It is. But I think, nuclear is something that we could find consensus on. Like I say, tell me what you don't like about it and let me solve that. I think there's just a number of areas. Carbon sequestration. Let me tell you why carbon sequestration is important. Is if we stop all carbon going into the air tomorrow, if somehow you and I could wave a wand and we could stop all carbon going into the air, there's still too much carbon in the air, right? And the amount, let's suppose the United States does a wonderful job of switching over to all green energy, right? Well, and the rest of the world doesn't. So I think it's a mistake to leave carbon sequestration out of the conversation if we really want to get to the levels of carbon that people are talking about.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because even, right now with the extreme weather that we're seeing with, the cold temperatures across the kind of Midwest, Southeast, there seems to be a lot of finger pointing, with people are saying, well, see, it's the windmills, or see, it's, too much natural gas. And in reality, I think we really need kind of all these energy, tools in the toolbox. And it seems like resiliency is really the name of the game going forward, I would think.
Somebody shared a picture with me of a windmill that was frozen from the wind, right, or from the cold and the snow and the sleet. And there was a helicopter above it dropping some chemicals and things like that on it. And they made the point of like, there's fossil fuels coming to the rescue, right, of these windmills. And the point is, I think, is that we're not at a place today where we can flip a switch and turn off fossil fuels. And I think the weather, extremes have shown us that. I think that can be a goal, right? But let's come back to the main goal, reducing pollutants in the air, particularly greenhouse gas emissions, right? And if I can use fossil fuels to do that, let me do that, because if that is the goal, let's do that. And there are lots of levels of fossil fuels in the way they impact the environment, and to put them all into one bag. And even within the categories, for instance, coal, you got lots of coal that will burn at lots of different levels of emissions, right?
Right.
And so, I have people have to realize one of my counties that I represent is called Carbon County. Now, what do you suppose they do for decades and generations, right? And one of the problems is we villainize these people, and we don't realize that these people for decades are the ones that allowed us to flip a switch on the wall and make us warm or cold in the summer, or to give us light. And it's really not fair to villainize them. We need to realize that, yes, they're transitioning. They know as well as anybody that they're transitioning. We don't have to shout it from the housetops that they're bad people. They get it. The marketplace is transitioning them into a new life. And that's the thing. I think we could also find common ground on consensus on both sides is as we move to these different sources of fuels, people would fight it less if we help people transition from the old to the new. You wonder why they fight it? They fight it because we villainize them and we take away their way of life, and they see no alternative. Of course, they're going to fight it.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. In fact, heard somebody along those lines, recently say, look, coal's not the enemy, carbon's the enemy. I guess now that you've told me that there's a carbon city, then I, better be a little careful. I don't want to villainize those folks either.
Yeah, and you know what? There's a lot of uses for carbon that don't burn it. Carbon fibers and things like that, right? And in Carbon County, actually right next to Carbon County and Emory County, they're working on technology and testing the way that we burn carbon to see if we can reduce the emissions. And we really shouldn't rule those things out.
Yeah, that's such a good point. One thing you said, and I know we're getting close on time, but you mentioned sort of the, some of the early skepticism or some of the even ongoing skepticism around climate and the policies to address it, or because it feels like and looks like in reality oftentimes that liberals are trying to like socially engineer the economy. And it's hard to have one of these conversations these days without talking about the Green New Deal. And so, when you look at that, there's so much in there that's not related to climate and energy and the environment. I'm just kind of curious on, what's your sense on, is the Green New Deal getting traction within Democrats and liberals, or is it become just more of a high level talking point? I know President, Biden has said he doesn't support it, but he is implementing some of the elements of it. So just curious on your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll smile and hope I don't offend my friends on the left with this response. But I think it's one of the best things that could happen to conservatives. And let me tell you why. Is for years, conservatives have refused to step into this logical, thoughtful ground on the climate and what we can do. And Democrats have occupied that. And the Green New Deal moved them out of that thoughtful, logical ground over to extremism and left room for Republicans to come in and take over the thoughtful ground. And I say that stereotyping it, really realizing many Democrats have not left the thoughtful ground. I don't mean to imply that at all. But the Green New Deal is viewed as so extreme. What, are we really going to stop all airline traffic? Are we really going to stop all agriculture? Right? No, we're not. And so it's viewed as extremism by those that I associate with. And what we really need to do, and to be honest, extremism exists on the right as well. And that extreme is basically putting your head in the sand and pretending nothing's happening, right? So I don't mean to imply that one side's more guilty than the others. But what we need is thoughtful people on both right and the left to come together and find solutions that we can agree on that meet the end goal, which is reducing pollutants in the air, carbon, greenhouse gas emissions in the air, and judge things based upon how well they do that, and let the best ideas survive and the best ways survive based upon how they do that. And I think when you fall short of that, that's when you get the accusations of the social engineering, the Keystone Pipeline. Well, you're just trying to change, and it doesn't really change greenhouse gas emissions. You have another agenda there. That you're trying to go after, not greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of the reality is, conservatives, right? We believe in free market ideas. We believe in competition. And so
bring it on.
Yeah, bring it on. I love it. Well, Congressman Curtis, thank you so much for being with us. Anything else you want to say that we didn't touch on today?
I listened last night to Bill Gates talk about his new book. And he starts his new book by saying, I'm paraphrasing, it's like, let me admit right up front, I'm not perfect. And I think that's so important because we sometimes expect perfection from those of us that like to talk about this. And we're not. And I regret that we have what I call a culture of shaming, which is you can never be good enough. You can never do enough, right? And so any efforts you make are criticized. And I'd love to turn that to a culture of rewarding. And rewarding people for even small things that they do so that they become kind of addicted to being better stewards. And I think that only happens if we're dealing with a positive environment instead of a negative environment.
Well, that's such a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Congressman Curtis. Thank you for being with us today. It's been a real pleasure, and hope you'll come back and see us.
Of course.
Yeah, to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. Please follow us on social media, and to keep up to date on what the free market is doing to promote practical solutions, please join our email list at c3newsmag.com. It's one thing in life that's still free. And keep an eye out for future events as a part of this Right Voices series. We do plan to have many more distinguished guests like Congressman Curtis, members of Congress, business leaders, philanthropists, and even farmers. So in the meantime, stay safe, stay sane, and have a great day.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you.